It was built before the wheel was in widespread use. It stood as the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years, and we still do not know exactly how they did it. Tonight, as the world around you grows quiet and the familiar weight of the day begins to lift from your shoulders, we're going to travel together across time and across the sands of an ancient desert, to stand before something that should not exist and yet does. Something that has watched empires rise and crumble while it alone remained. The Great Pyramid of Giza. Welcome to Let's Learn While You Sleep. Tonight, the sand beneath our feet is warm and the sky above is impossibly wide, painted in the deep indigo of an Egyptian evening. We are standing on the Giza Plateau, just southwest of what is now modern Cairo, and before us rises a monument so old that it was already ancient when Cleopatra walked the earth. The Great Pyramid, also known as the Pyramid of Khufu, was completed around 2560 BCE during the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom. It was commissioned by the pharaoh Khufu, whom the Greeks would later call Cheops, and for approximately 3,800 years from its completion until the construction of Lincoln Cathedral in England around 1311 CE, it remained the tallest structure ever built by human hands. It is the only one of the original 7 wonders of the ancient world that still stands. Let your body settle now. Let your breathing find its own gentle rhythm. There is nothing to do tonight but listen and wonder and drift. To understand the Great Pyramid, we must first understand the world into which it was born. Around 2560 BCE, the civilization of ancient Egypt was already more than 500 years old, counting from the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaohs around 3100 BCE. The Old Kingdom, sometimes called the Age of the Pyramids, was a period of remarkable stability, centralized power, and architectural ambition unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Nile River was the heart of everything. Each year, between June and September, the river would flood, depositing rich black silt across the farmlands of the valley. And it was this annual gift of fertile soil that made Egyptian civilization possible. The pharaoh was not merely a king, but was believed to be a living god, an intermediary between the people and the divine order they called Ma'at, the principle of truth, justice, and cosmic harmony. And it was within this understanding, this deep cultural belief, that the pharaoh's passage to the afterlife was essential for the continued well-being of all Egypt, that the pyramids were conceived. They were not monuments to vanity. They were, in the minds of their builders, necessary structures, machines of resurrection, vessels to carry a god-king into eternity. The Great Pyramid was the culmination of generations of architectural learning. Before Khufu, his father Sneferu had built at least 3 pyramids, including the famous bent pyramid at Dashur, whose angle changes partway up, likely because the original slope proved too steep and unstable. Sneferu's Red Pyramid, also at Dashur, is considered the first true smooth-sided pyramid ever completed, and it was from this success that the builders of the next generation drew their confidence. So, when Khufu ascended the throne, the knowledge existed, the workforce existed, the motivation, both spiritual and political, burned with the intensity of the desert sun. And the result would be the single most ambitious construction project of the ancient world, a structure so precise and so massive that it defies easy explanation even today. Let yourself settle deeper now, and imagine the plateau as it might have looked, cleared and leveled, waiting for the first stone to be placed. Now, Let us consider what was actually built. The Great Pyramid originally stood approximately 146.6 meters tall, roughly 481 feet. Though weathering and the loss of its outer casing stones have reduced it to about 138.5 meters today, its base is a nearly perfect square, with each side measuring approximately 230.4 meters, or about 756 feet. And when we say nearly perfect, we mean something extraordinary. The difference in length between the longest and shortest sides of the base is only about 4.4 centimeters, less than 2 inches, across a distance of more than 200 meters. The base is also remarkably level. Surveys have shown that the variation in height across the entire foundation platform is only about 2.1 centimeters. To put that in perspective, imagine a surface larger than 13 acres, leveled to within the thickness of a thumb. And it was done without lasers, without GPS, without any of the instruments we consider essential to modern surveying. The pyramid is estimated to contain roughly 2.3 million stone blocks, though the exact number is uncertain because no one has ever disassembled it to count. The average weight of these blocks is often cited as approximately 2.5 metric tons, though some blocks, particularly the granite beams above the King's Chamber, weigh as much as 80 metric tons. The total mass of the structure is estimated at around 6 million metric tons. The core of the pyramid is primarily local limestone, quarried from the Giza plateau itself. But the original outer casing was made of fine white Tura limestone, quarried from across the Nile River to the east, and the interior chambers incorporate massive blocks of granite transported from Aswan, nearly 800 kilometers to the south. The logistical challenge of moving that granite, each block weighing tens of tons, hundreds of miles along the Nile, and then up onto the rising pyramid, remains one of the most astonishing feats of the ancient world. Breathe slowly now, and imagine these numbers not as abstractions, but as stone, as weight, as the sound of copper chisels, and the slow grind of rock against rock, all of it guided by hands that understood something profound about precision. And now we arrive at one of the deepest mysteries of the ancient world, the question that has fascinated and frustrated scholars for centuries. How did they build it? The honest answer, the one that any responsible Egyptologist will give you, is that we do not know with certainty. We have strong theories and we have growing evidence, but no one has yet found a contemporary Egyptian document that describes the construction method in detail. The most widely discussed theory involves ramps of some kind. The simplest version proposes a single straight ramp, rising from the desert floor to the working level of the pyramid, up which blocks were dragged on sledges. This is plausible for the lower courses, but a straight ramp reaching the summit would need to be enormously long to maintain a workable gradient, perhaps over a mile, requiring almost as much material as the pyramid itself. A variation suggests a spiraling external ramp that wound around the pyramid as it rose, though critics note that such a ramp would obscure the corners, making it difficult to check the pyramid's geometry during construction. In 2007, the French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed an intriguing alternative, an internal ramp theory. He suggested that while a short external ramp was used for the lower third of the pyramid, the upper courses were built using a spiral ramp hidden within the structure itself, with blocks hauled up through the interior and turned at the corners. Some evidence supports this idea. Microgravimetry surveys conducted in 1986 by a French team detected a spiral-shaped anomaly of lower density within the pyramid, which could be consistent with an internal passage. But the evidence is not yet conclusive. What we do know is that the builders used copper tools, which are softer than iron but effective on limestone, and that they likely employed wooden sledges with water poured on the sand in front to reduce friction. A wall painting in the tomb of Jehutihotep, dating to roughly 1880 BCE, actually depicts this technique, showing workers dragging a massive statue on a sledge while one figure pours water ahead. The technology was simple, but the organization, the planning, the sustained collective will, those were extraordinary. Let that thought rest with you gently as we continue. Now, let us walk very quietly into the interior. The Great Pyramid contains 3 known chambers. The lowest is the Subterranean Chamber, carved into the bedrock beneath the pyramid, roughly 30 meters below the base. It appears to be unfinished, a rough, irregular room that may represent an abandoned plan or a symbolic underworld space. Its purpose remains debated. Above it, reached by a narrow ascending passage, lies the so-called Queen's Chamber, a modest room with a gabled limestone ceiling. Despite its name, this chamber almost certainly had nothing to do with a queen. The name was given by early Arab explorers following their own burial customs. Some researchers believe it may have held a sacred statue of the pharaoh, called a serdab figure, or served a ritual function connected to the afterlife. But the true heart of the pyramid is the King's Chamber, a room constructed entirely of red granite from Aswan. It measures approximately 10.5 meters long, 5.2 meters wide, and 5.8 meters high. Within it sits a single granite sarcophagus, cut from a single block of stone, unadorned and empty when first entered in modern times. Above the King's Chamber are 5 relieving chambers, stacked one above the other, designed to redistribute the immense weight of the stone above and prevent the ceiling from collapsing. The topmost of these chambers has a pointed roof of massive limestone blocks arranged in an inverted V shape. It is a brilliantly simple engineering solution, and it has worked flawlessly for over 4,500 years. Connecting these spaces is the Grand Gallery, one of the most breathtaking architectural achievements of the ancient world. It is a corbelled passageway approximately 47 meters long and 8.6 meters high, rising at a steep 26-degree angle. The walls step inward as they rise, narrowing gracefully, creating a soaring interior space that feels almost cathedral-like in its proportions. In the silence of this passage, if you could stand there alone, you would feel the weight of all that stone pressing gently inward, and yet held perfectly, effortlessly in place. Let that stillness surround you now. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Great Pyramid is its alignment. The 4 sides of the base are oriented almost exactly to true north, south, east, and west. The deviation from true north is only about 3 minutes and 6 seconds of arc, or roughly 1/20th of a degree. This is an astonishing level of precision, and it was achieved more than 2,000 years before the invention of the magnetic compass. How did the ancient Egyptians accomplish this? Several methods have been proposed. One widely accepted theory, put forward by the Egyptologist Flinders Petrie in the late 19th century and refined by others since, suggests they may have used stellar observations. By watching a circumpolar star, perhaps Thuban, which was closer to the celestial North Pole around 2560 BCE than Polaris is today, and marking its position at rising and setting against an artificial horizon, they could have determined true north with extraordinary accuracy. Another theory suggests they may have used the sun's shadow, tracking the tip of a shadow cast by a vertical rod called a gnomon, marking the points where the shadow's arc crosses a circle drawn on the ground, and bisecting the angle between those points to find a true north-south line. Both methods would have been available to the Egyptians with the tools and knowledge they possessed, and both can achieve the level of precision observed. Beyond cardinal alignment, the pyramid also sits at a latitude of approximately 29.9792 degrees north. Some have noted that this number closely resembles the speed of light in meters per second, 299,792,458, and have suggested this is evidence of advanced knowledge. However, the meter as a unit of measurement was not defined until 1793 in France, and the degree system of latitude, while ancient, was not standardized in its modern form until much later. The resemblance is almost certainly a coincidence, though an amusing one. What is not a coincidence is the extraordinary care with which this site was chosen, on a high plateau of solid limestone bedrock, capable of supporting millions of tons of stone without settling or shifting. The geology was as carefully considered as the geometry. Let that precision settle into your mind like the slow alignment of stars wheeling overhead. For many years, popular imagination held that the pyramids were built by slaves, a belief reinforced by Hollywood films and biblical associations. But modern archaeology tells a very different story. The evidence now strongly suggests that the Great Pyramid was built by a workforce of skilled and semi-skilled laborers organized into teams, housed in purpose-built villages, and fed by the resources of the Egyptian state. In 1990, the archaeologist Mark Lehner and his colleague Zahi Hawass began excavating a workers' village near the pyramids, located just south of the Sphinx. What they found was remarkable. There were bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread per day. There were breweries, for beer was a staple of the Egyptian diet and a form of payment. There were fish processing facilities, cattle bones indicating regular supplies of beef, and evidence of medical treatment, including healed bones that showed workers had received care for injuries. The workers lived in organized barrack-style housing, and graffiti found on some pyramid blocks suggests they worked in named teams, with names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, the kind of irreverent, spirited names that working crews throughout history have given themselves. The workforce is now estimated to have been roughly 20 to 30,000 people at any given time, far fewer than the 100,000 reported by the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt around 450 BCE, more than 2,000 years after the pyramid was built, and who was relying on accounts given to him by Egyptian priests. Many of the workers were likely conscripted farmers who labored during the annual Nile flood season, when their fields were underwater and agricultural work was impossible. This was not slavery. It was corvée labor, a form of mandatory service to the state that was common throughout the ancient world, and that the workers themselves may have viewed as a sacred obligation, a contribution to a cosmic project that would benefit all of Egypt for eternity. Imagine them now, those tens of thousands of people working in the early morning light before the desert heat became unbearable, pulling together, believing in something larger than themselves. Let that image hold you softly. When the Great Pyramid was completed, it would have looked nothing like the stepped, weathered monument we see today. Its original appearance was dramatically different and far more striking. The entire outer surface was clad in fine white Tura limestone, carefully cut and polished to a smooth, gleaming finish. In the full light of the Egyptian sun, the pyramid would have blazed like a beacon, visible for miles across the desert and the Nile Valley, a massive geometric form of pure, reflected light. The casing stones were cut with extraordinary precision, fitted so tightly together that, according to Petrie's measurements in the 1880s, the joints between them averaged only about 0.5 millimeter wide, thinner than a sheet of paper. Some accounts suggest that the very apex of the pyramid may have been capped with a pyramidion, a small pyramid-shaped capstone, possibly made of electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver. We do not have direct evidence that the Great Pyramid's pyramidion was made of electrum, but pyramidions from other pyramids have been found, and ancient texts reference gilded capstones. If it existed, this golden point would have caught the first light of dawn and the last light of dusk, glowing above the white limestone like a star hovering over the desert. The ancient Egyptians called the Great Pyramid Akhet Khufu, which translates roughly to the horizon of Khufu, a name that beautifully captures its relationship to the sun and the sky. Over the millennia, most of the casing stones were removed. A major earthquake in 1303 CE loosened many of them, and in the 14th century, Sultan al-Nasir Nasir ad-Din al-Hassan reportedly authorized their removal for use in building mosques and fortresses in Cairo, including the Mosque of Sultan Hassan. A few casing stones still remain at the base of the pyramid, and when you see them smooth and precisely angled among the rougher core blocks, you begin to understand what has been lost and what once shone so brilliantly that the ancient world counted it among its 7 greatest wonders. Let that image glow softly in your mind as you rest. Great Pyramid does not stand alone. It is the centerpiece of a carefully planned complex that includes smaller pyramids, temples, causeways, and other structures, all connected by ritual and purpose. To the south of the Great Pyramid stand 3 smaller pyramids, known as the Queen's Pyramids, traditionally attributed to Khufu's queens or family members. Nearby, 5 boat pits were carved into the bedrock, and in 1954, the Egyptian archaeologist Kamal el-Malla discovered an extraordinary treasure in one of them, a fully disassembled cedarwood boat, sealed in a pit and preserved for over 4.5 millennia. When reconstructed, this vessel, now known as the Khufu ship, measured approximately 43.6 meters long and 5.9 meters wide. It is one of the oldest, largest, and best preserved ancient vessels ever found. Its purpose remains debated. It may have been a solar bark intended to carry the pharaoh's spirit across the heavens alongside the sun god Ra. Or it may have been a practical vessel used in Khufu's funeral procession along the Nile. Perhaps it was both. A second boat was discovered in an adjacent pit and was extracted and conserved between 2011 and 2021, now housed alongside the first in the Grand Egyptian Museum near Giza. The pyramid complex also included a mortuary temple on its eastern face, where offerings to the dead pharaoh would have been made, and a valley temple near the Nile, connected to the mortuary temple by a long covered causeway. Almost nothing remains of these structures today, but their foundations have been traced by archaeologists. To the east and west of the pyramid, rows of mastabas, flat-topped rectangular tombs, were built for Khufu's officials, courtiers, and family members, creating a city of the dead arranged in orderly streets around the great monument. The entire complex was a landscape of belief, a carefully orchestrated geography of death and resurrection, the afterlife made visible in stone. And at its center, rising above everything, the Great Pyramid held the body of the king and the hopes of a civilization. Let that vast, quiet landscape rest in your imagination now. In recent years, new technologies have begun to reveal secrets of the Great Pyramid that were invisible to earlier generations of explorers. In 2017, an international collaboration called the Scan Pyramids Project, using a technique called muon tomography, announced the detection of a large, previously unknown void within the pyramid. Muons are subatomic particles created when cosmic rays from deep space strike atoms in Earth's upper atmosphere. They rain down on us constantly, millions passing through your body every day, and they have a useful property. They pass through solid matter, but they are partially absorbed depending on the density and thickness of the material. By placing muon detectors inside and around the pyramid and measuring how many muons arrived from each direction, the researchers could effectively X-ray the structure without touching it. The void they detected is located above the Grand Gallery, roughly the same size, at least 30 meters long, and it appears to be a distinct architectural space, not merely a gap between blocks. The discovery was published in the journal Nature in November 2017, and it was the first major new structural discovery inside the Great Pyramid since the 19th century. What the void is remains unknown. It may be a relieving chamber designed to reduce weight above the Grand Gallery. It may be an undiscovered corridor or chamber with a purpose we have yet to understand. Some have speculated it could contain artifacts or inscriptions, but until a method is devised to access or image its contents without damaging the pyramid, it will keep its silence. Then, in March 2023, the Scan Pyramids team announced another discovery, a previously unknown corridor approximately 9 meters long, located behind the chevron-shaped stones above the main entrance on the pyramid's north face. This corridor was confirmed using a combination of muon imaging and endoscopic cameras inserted through small bore holes. It too appears to be empty, but its existence suggests that the pyramid may contain still more undiscovered spaces. The Great Pyramid, it seems, has not yet given up all its secrets, and there is something deeply comforting in that, the idea that even after 4,500 years of human curiosity, mysteries remain. Let that thought settle over you like a warm blanket in the dark. Consider for a moment the sheer span of time across which this monument has existed. The Great Pyramid was completed around 2560 BCE. When the philosopher Thales of Miletus visited Egypt around 600 BCE, the pyramid was already nearly 2,000 years old. When the Roman Empire was at its height under Emperor Trajan around 117 CE, the pyramid was already 26 centuries old. When the Prophet Muhammad was born around 570 CE, the pyramid had been standing for more than 3,000 years. When the Normans conquered England in 1066, the pyramid was 36 centuries old. And tonight, as you lie in the gentle dark listening to these words, it has endured for approximately 45.5 centuries. To feel that stretch of time, consider this. If you could somehow watch the entire recorded history of human civilization condensed into a single 24-hour day, beginning at midnight with the earliest cities of Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE. Then the Great Pyramid would be completed before 3 in the morning. The birth of Christ would occur around 9 in the evening. The European Renaissance would begin after 11 at night. And the entirety of the modern era, from the Industrial Revolution to the Internet, from the first powered flight to the moon landings, would occupy only the last 45 minutes before midnight. The Great Pyramid has been standing since the very early hours of that metaphorical day. And it is still standing now. It has survived earthquakes, including a significant one in 1303 CE. It has survived the slow theft of its outer casing, the tunneling of treasure seekers, and the casual vandalism of centuries. It has survived the wind and sand and blinding sun of the Sahara. It was not built to be beautiful, though it is. It was not built to be a monument to human ambition, though it has become one. It was built to last forever. And by the standards of human civilization, it very nearly has. Let the vastness of that time carry you now, the way a slow river carries a leaf, gently and without effort, toward whatever quiet place awaits. Throughout history, the Great Pyramid has inspired not only wonder, but also wild speculation. From ancient Greek travelers to modern conspiracy theorists, people have struggled to accept that ordinary human beings, using the technology of the Bronze Age, could have created something so precise and so enduring. And so alternative theories have flourished. Some have claimed the pyramids were built by the civilization of Atlantis, the legendary island described by Plato around 360 BCE in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. But there is no archaeological evidence that Atlantis ever existed, and most scholars consider it a philosophical allegory rather than a historical account. Others have proposed that extraterrestrial beings were involved, a claim popularized in the 20th century by writers such as Erich von Däniken in his 1968 book Chariots of the Gods. This theory has no supporting evidence and is regarded by the archaeological community as pseudoscience. It also, perhaps unintentionally, diminishes the extraordinary achievements of the ancient Egyptians themselves. There is something subtly disrespectful in suggesting that these people, who developed sophisticated mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering, could not have built what they quite clearly did build with the tools and knowledge they demonstrably possessed. The truth is, in many ways, more inspiring than any myth. The Great Pyramid was built by human beings, tens of thousands of them, working together over an estimated period of roughly 20 years, using copper and stone tools, wooden sledges, ropes of papyrus and flax, and an understanding of geometry and logistics that we are still working to fully comprehend. They did it without iron, without the wheel in its load-bearing form, without pulleys as we know them. They did it with muscle, planning, and a collective belief that what they were building mattered profoundly. And it did matter, because here it still stands, the single most enduring testament to what human cooperation and determination can achieve when directed toward a single, extraordinary purpose. That truth needs no embellishment. It is magnificent exactly as it is. Let it rest quietly in your mind, a monument not to mystery, but to human capability. There is one more dimension of the Great Pyramid that deserves our attention tonight, and it is perhaps the most poetic. The pyramid was designed fundamentally as a vessel of light. The ancient Egyptians' understanding of the afterlife was intimately connected to the sun, to the daily journey of the god Ra across the sky. and to the stars of the night. The so-called air shafts that extend from the King's Chamber and Queen's Chamber are narrow channels, only about 20 centimeters wide, that run upward through the body of the pyramid to its outer surface. For many years, their purpose was debated. Were they ventilation channels? Were they structural features? In the 1960s and 1970s, astronomers including Virginia Trimble and Alexander Badawi proposed that these shafts were aligned with specific stars as they would have appeared around 25 and 60 BCE. The southern shaft of the King's Chamber appears to have been aligned with the star Alnitak in Orion's belt, which the Egyptians associated with Osiris, the god of the dead and resurrection. The southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber appears to have pointed towards Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, which the Egyptians identified with the goddess Isis. The northern shaft of the King's Chamber appears to have been aimed at Thuban, the pole star of that era, in the constellation Draco. These alignments are approximate and remain debated among scholars, but the general principle is widely accepted. The shafts were most likely not for air, they were for the soul. They were channels through which the spirit of the pharaoh, the ancient Egyptians called it the Ba, could ascend from the darkness of the burial chamber to join the imperishable stars. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine lying in the heart of 6 million tons of stone in perfect darkness and yet connected by a narrow passage of light to a star that has been burning for millions of years. The pyramid was never just a tomb. It was a doorway between the earth and the cosmos. And tonight, as you lie in your own gentle darkness, the same stars that shone through those shafts still burn overhead, patient and enduring, waiting for no one and welcoming everyone. As the centuries passed, the Great Pyramid became a destination for explorers, scholars, and seekers from across the world. The earliest known account of the pyramid's interior in the modern era comes from the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun, who reportedly ordered a tunnel to be cut into the north face around 820 CE. His workers, unable to find the original entrance, reportedly heated the limestone blocks with fire and then doused them with cold vinegar to crack the stone, hammering their way inward until they broke into the ascending passage. Whether al-Ma'mun found anything inside is unclear, though later accounts suggest the chambers were already empty. In the centuries that followed, European travelers began to visit and write about the pyramids. The Italian explorer Giovanni Battista Belzoni explored Giza and other Egyptian sites in the early 19th century. In the 1830s, the British officer Howard Vyse conducted extensive, sometimes destructive, explorations of the Great Pyramid using gunpowder to blast open chambers. It was Vyse who discovered the relieving chambers above the King's Chamber and found quarry marks, including cartouches bearing the name of Khufu, providing crucial evidence that the pyramid was indeed built by that pharaoh. In the 1880s, the meticulous British surveyor Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie spent years measuring the pyramid with unprecedented accuracy. His work, published as The Pyramids and Temples of Gizeh in 1883, remains a foundational text in Egyptology. Petrie's measurements revealed the astonishing precision of the construction and debunked many of the more fanciful theories that had accumulated around the pyramid. Each generation has brought new tools and new questions. From Napoleon's savants in 1798, who surveyed and documented the monuments during the French campaign in Egypt, to today's researchers using drones, LiDAR and muon detectors, the Great Pyramid has been measured, mapped and studied more thoroughly than perhaps any other structure on Earth. And still, it holds its silence, patient as the bedrock beneath it. Let the long procession of all those curious visitors drift through your mind now, a gentle parade across the centuries, each one standing before the same stones, each one feeling the same sense of wonder. There is a quiet mathematics to the Great Pyramid that speaks to something deeper than engineering, something almost musical in its proportions. The ratio of the pyramid's original height to half the length of its base is very close to the value of phi, the golden ratio, approximately 1.618. Whether the Egyptians intended this or whether it emerged naturally from the slope angle they chose, which is approximately 51.84 degrees, has been debated for over a century. Some scholars, including those following the analysis of the mathematician Roger Hertz-Fischler, have argued that the golden ratio correspondence is likely coincidental, a natural consequence of using a seked, the Egyptian unit of slope, of 5.5 palms per cubit of rise. Others find the correspondence too close to be accidental and suggest the Egyptians may have been aware of this proportion, even if they did not express it in the way Greek mathematicians later would. What is not in doubt is the Egyptians' mastery of practical geometry. They could calculate areas, volumes and slopes with impressive accuracy using methods recorded in mathematical texts such as the Rind Papyrus, dating to approximately 1550 BCE, but believed to be a copy of an older document from perhaps 1850 BCE. The pyramid also encodes the relationship between a circle and its diameter. If you take the perimeter of the base, approximately 921.6 meters, and divide it by twice the original height, approximately 293.2 meters, you get a number very close to pi, approximately 3.14. Again, whether this was deliberate or a byproduct of the seked-based slope calculation is unknown. But the beauty of the result is undeniable. Here is a structure that embodies, in stone, fundamental mathematical relationships that humans would spend the next several thousand years discovering and formalizing. Whether the builders understood this in abstract terms or simply in the practical language of ropes and cubits and shadows on sand, the pyramid speaks a kind of geometry that feels universal, a language older than any alphabet. Let those quiet harmonies hum beneath your thoughts now, soft and orderly, like the hidden structure beneath a lullaby. Consider for a moment the landscape that surrounds the Great Pyramid and how that landscape has changed across the slow turning of millennia. Today, the Giza Plateau sits at the edge of modern Cairo, a sprawling city of over 20 million people, and the desert presses close against the stones like a golden sea frozen mid-wave. But 46 centuries ago, when the pyramid was young, this place would have looked profoundly different. The River Nile flowed closer to the plateau than it does now, and a network of canals and harbors connected the construction site to the water. Recent research, including work published in 2022 using radar satellite imagery and sediment core analysis, has revealed evidence of a now vanished branch of the Nile, sometimes called the Khufu branch, that once ran within perhaps a few hundred meters of the pyramid complex. This ancient waterway would have been essential for transporting the enormous limestone blocks quarried from Tura on the opposite bank, and the granite beams that traveled hundreds of kilometers downstream from the quarries at Aswan. Imagine barges laden with stone drifting northward on the current, arriving at a harbor that no longer exists beside a monument that still does. The climate of Egypt was somewhat wetter during the Old Kingdom than it is today, and the desert margins may have supported more vegetation, more wildlife, more movement of people along green corridors that have since turned to sand. The plateau itself was chosen with great care, a natural prominence of dense limestone bedrock strong enough to bear the incomprehensible weight of 2.5 million blocks stacked to a height that would not be surpassed by any human structure for nearly 4,000 years. The builders understood their geology. They understood their river. They understood the way water and stone and distance could be woven together into a system of logistics so effective that it still astonishes engineers who study it today. And yet the river moved, as rivers always do, shifting its course westward over centuries, leaving the harbors to fill with silt, leaving the canals to dry, leaving only the pyramid standing above a world that quietly rearranged itself beneath it. Deep inside the Great Pyramid, there are spaces that have confounded researchers for generations, and some of those spaces may not yet have been entered by any living person in thousands of years. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project, an international collaboration using muon tomography, a technique that detects subatomic particles called muons as they pass through solid matter, announced the discovery of a large void above the Grand Gallery. This void, sometimes referred to as the Big Void, is estimated to be at least 30 meters long, making it comparable in scale to the Grand Gallery itself, which is one of the most impressive architectural spaces in the ancient world. The precise shape and purpose of this void remain unknown. Some researchers have proposed it may be a relieving chamber designed to distribute the immense weight of the stones above the Grand Gallery and prevent its ceiling from collapsing. Others have suggested it could be a construction gap, a remnant of the building process rather than a deliberately designed room. And still others wonder, cautiously and with appropriate scientific restraint, whether it might be something else entirely, perhaps a sealed chamber whose contents, if any, have not been seen by human eyes since the reign of Khufu. Muon tomography works by measuring the way cosmic ray muons, which rain down constantly from the upper atmosphere, are absorbed or deflected by dense material. Stone absorbs more muons than empty air, so by placing sensitive detectors inside the pyramid and mapping the muon flux from different angles, scientists can effectively see through solid rock without drilling a single hole. It is a form of imaging that respects the integrity of the monument while revealing its hidden geometry. The Scan Pyramids team also detected a smaller void behind the north face of the pyramid, near the original entrance, and subsequent investigations have continued to refine our understanding of these hidden spaces. We do not yet know what lies within them. We may not know for years or even decades, as the ethical and archaeological considerations of accessing such spaces are immense. And so the pyramid keeps its secrets a little longer, wrapped in limestone and silence, waiting in the dark with the patience that only stone can possess. There is something worth lingering on about the sheer endurance of the Great Pyramid, the way it has outlasted not merely buildings and cities, but entire civilizations, entire ways of understanding the world. When the Greek historian Herodotus visited Egypt around 450 BCE, the pyramid was already more than 2,000 years old, and the civilization that built it had risen, flourished, fragmented, been conquered, and risen again multiple times. Herodotus recorded that he was told the construction took 100,000 workers and 20 years, though modern Egyptologists believe the actual workforce was likely closer to 20 to 30,000 people, organized in rotating crews. The laborers were not slaves, as was once commonly believed. Archaeological evidence from workers' villages near Giza, excavated extensively by Egyptologist Mark Lehner and archaeologist Zahi Hawass beginning in the 1990s, reveals that the builders were fed well, receiving bread, beer and meat. Their bones show signs of healed fractures, suggesting they received medical care. They were buried in modest but respectful tombs near the pyramid itself, an honor that would never have been granted to enslaved people in ancient Egyptian culture. These were skilled workers and conscripted laborers participating in a national project, something closer to a massive public works endeavor than the cruel forced labor depicted in later popular imagination. The organization required to feed, house and coordinate tens of thousands of people across 2 decades of construction represents one of the earliest known examples of large-scale project management in human history. Grain had to be collected from across the kingdom. Tools had to be manufactured and repaired. Copper chisels wore down against limestone and had to be resharpened constantly. Ramps, whatever their exact configuration may have been, had to be extended and adjusted as each new course of stone was laid. And all of this was accomplished without iron tools, without wheeled vehicles on the construction site itself, and without any of the mechanical advantages that later civilizations would take for granted. The pyramid is not merely a monument to a king. It is a monument to the collective effort of an entire society, working together across years of patient, deliberate labor. And now, as we settle deeper into this quiet hour, let us consider what the Great Pyramid means not to archaeologists or engineers, but to the simple human desire to build something that lasts. Every civilization, in its own way, has tried to leave a mark upon the earth, a signal to the future that says, we were here, we mattered, we understood something about the world. The Great Pyramid is perhaps the most successful version of that impulse ever realized. It has survived earthquakes, including a severe one in 1303 CE that damaged much of Cairo. It has survived the removal of nearly all its original casing stones, which were taken over centuries to build mosques and fortresses in the growing city nearby. It has survived treasure hunters who blasted tunnels through its interior, and it has survived the slow, quiet assault of wind and sand and rain across more than 4,500 years of exposure. The limestone core blocks, quarried from the plateau itself, fit together with a precision that varies throughout the structure. Some joints remarkably tight, others showing the practical compromises of a massive construction effort. But the overall result is a form so geometrically stable that it has barely shifted. The pyramid shape itself, a square base tapering to a point, is one of the most structurally sound forms in architecture, distributing weight downward and outward in a way that resists collapse. It is, in a sense, a shape that cooperates with gravity rather than fighting it. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson the Great Pyramid offers to anyone willing to listen. That endurance is not about rigidity, but about alignment, about finding the geometry that works with the forces of the world rather than against them. The stones do not struggle. They rest. They bear their weight calmly, each one supported by the ones beneath it, each one supporting the ones above. There is a kind of wisdom in that arrangement, a patience built into the very architecture. And as you lie here tonight, breathing slowly, you might allow yourself to feel something similar, a gentle settling, a quiet alignment, the steady and unhurried architecture of rest. For centuries, travelers and scholars tried to explain how the Great Pyramid was built, and many of those early theories were as grand as the monument itself. In the 19th century, some Western visitors, unable to reconcile the achievement with their own prejudices, proposed that the builders must have possessed lost technologies or supernatural assistance. And yet, the truth, as it so often does, turns out to be more remarkable than any fantasy. The pyramid was built by human hands, human ingenuity, and an extraordinary degree of social organization. Archaeological evidence uncovered over the past several decades has revealed a great deal about the workforce. Near the Giza plateau, researchers have excavated what appears to be a workers' village, dating to the reign of Khufu himself. The remains of bakeries, breweries, and sleeping quarters paint a picture not of enslaved masses, but of a rotating labor force, perhaps numbering around 20,000 people at any given time, fed on bread, beef, and beer. Graffiti left by work gangs inside the pyramid's relieving chambers bear team names, phrases like "Friends of Khufu," suggesting something closer to organized pride than forced servitude. The logistics alone are staggering to contemplate. Limestone blocks, most of them quarried from formations just a few hundred meters south of the building site, had to be cut, shaped, transported and placed with extraordinary precision, and this process was repeated roughly 2.3 million times. The outer casing stones, made of fine Tura limestone from quarries across the Nile, were floated on barges during the annual flood season, then dragged on sledges to the plateau. Experiments have shown that wetting the sand in front of a heavy sledge reduces friction dramatically, and a wall painting in the tomb of Jehuti-Hotep from roughly 1900 BCE appears to depict exactly this technique. The internal granite beams, some weighing over 60 tons, were transported from Aswan, nearly 900 kilometers to the south. Consider for a moment the planning required to coordinate all of this: the quarrying, the transport, the placement, the feeding and housing of thousands, all sustained over what may have been a construction period of approximately 20 years. One of the most enduring mysteries of the Great Pyramid is the question of how precisely the builders raised those millions of blocks to ever greater heights. No contemporary Egyptian text has been found that describes the construction method in detail, and so researchers have proposed a number of theories, each with its own elegance and its own difficulties. The most widely discussed idea involves some form of ramp. A straight ramp leading from the ground to the summit would need to be enormously long to maintain a workable gradient, perhaps over a kilometer, and would itself require nearly as much material as the pyramid. A spiraling external ramp wrapping around the pyramid's faces as it rose is another possibility, though it would obscure the corners and make precise surveying more difficult. In 2007, the French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin proposed a compelling alternative: an internal ramp, a gently spiraling passage built within the body of the pyramid itself, through which blocks could be hauled upward and then maneuvered into position at each new level. Microgravimetry surveys of the pyramid have revealed what some researchers interpret as a spiraling density anomaly consistent with such a passage, though the evidence remains inconclusive and debate continues. It is also entirely possible that the builders used a combination of methods, perhaps an external ramp for the lower courses, where the bulk of the mass is concentrated, and a different technique for the upper reaches. What we can say with confidence is that the solution, whatever it was, had to be practical above all else. It had to work day after day, season after season, across decades. The ancient Egyptians were not theorists lost in abstraction. They were builders, problem solvers, engineers of extraordinary pragmatism. And there is something deeply restful in that thought. The idea that the greatest architectural achievement of the ancient world was accomplished not through a single flash of genius, but through the slow, patient accumulation of effort, one stone placed upon another, one day following the next, the way sleep itself arrives, not all at once, but gradually, gently, as the body lets go of wakefulness and settles into the long, quiet rhythm of the night. Great Pyramid did not stand alone. It was the centerpiece of a mortuary complex, a carefully planned landscape of ritual and remembrance. To its east stood a mortuary temple where priests would have performed offerings for the spirit of Khufu. A long causeway, now largely destroyed, once connected this temple to a valley temple near the Nile's floodplain, the place where the pharaoh's body would first have arrived by boat during the funeral procession. Flanking the pyramid, buried in sealed pits carved from the bedrock, lay full-sized wooden boats. In 1954, the Egyptian archaeologist Kamal el-Malakh discovered one of these vessels in a sealed pit on the southern side of the pyramid. When the 41 limestone slabs covering the pit were carefully removed, the scent of cedar wood rose from below, still fragrant after more than 4,500 years. The boat, disassembled into over 1,200 pieces, was painstakingly reconstructed over the following decade. It measured roughly 43 meters in length, a graceful vessel of Lebanese cedar, its planks lashed together with ropes rather than nails. It may have been a solar bark, intended to carry Khufu's spirit across the heavens alongside the sun god Ra, or it may have been the actual vessel that carried his body on its final journey up the Nile. A second boat pit nearby was opened in 2011 using modern archaeological techniques, and its contents are still being studied. Around the Great Pyramid, 3 smaller subsidiary pyramids stand in a row to the east, generally believed to have been built for queens of Khufu's court. The tombs of nobles and officials spread outward in an orderly grid, a city of the dead arranged with the same love of geometry that shaped the pyramid itself. And beyond all of this, gazing eastward with its weathered limestone face, sits the Great Sphinx, carved from a natural outcropping of rock during what most Egyptologists believe was the reign of Khufu's son, Khafra. Together, these monuments form a landscape not merely of death, but of passage, of transformation, of the ancient Egyptian conviction that the journey does not end when the body grows still. There is a particular quality to the light at Giza in the hours just after sunset, when the sky turns from copper to deep violet and the pyramids become silhouettes against the last glow of the western horizon. The ancient Egyptians called the West the land of the dead, because it was where the sun disappeared each evening, sinking beneath the edge of the world to travel through the Duat, the underworld, before being reborn at dawn. The pyramids were built on the west bank of the Nile for this reason, positioned at the threshold between the living world and whatever lay beyond. And so these monuments were never just tombs. They were machines of resurrection, devices designed to ensure that the pharaoh's spirit, the Ka, and the Ba would be sustained and reunited for all eternity. The pyramid's shape itself may have carried profound meaning. Some scholars have suggested it represents the primordial mound, the first land to emerge from the waters of chaos at the beginning of creation, according to Egyptian cosmology. Others see in its form a petrified ray of sunlight, an eternal beam connecting Earth to the heavens. The pyramid texts found in later pyramids of the 5th and 6th dynasties describe the deceased king ascending to the stars on beams of light, and the Great Pyramid's form seems to embody that aspiration in stone. The 4 faces align to the cardinal directions. The descending passage points toward the circumpolar stars, those stars that never set and which the Egyptians called the imperishable ones. Everything about the structure speaks of a civilization that looked at the night sky not with fear, but with longing, with the deep and patient hope that death was not an ending, but a doorway. And perhaps, as your own thoughts grow softer now, as the details of the day recede like the Nile withdrawing after its flood, there is something comforting in that ancient hope. The stars are still there above the pyramid tonight, the same stars that the builders watched from the plateau 45 centuries ago, turning slowly, silently, in their patient and unbroken arcs across the darkness, just as they have always done, just as they will continue to do long after we have closed our eyes. For centuries, scholars and travelers assumed that the Great Pyramid was built by slaves, a narrative reinforced by ancient Greek writers and much later by Hollywood. And yet the truth, as uncovered by modern archaeology, tells a very different and far more remarkable story. Beginning in the 1990s, the Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass and researcher Mark Lenner led excavations near the Pyramid Plateau that revealed the remains of a workers' village, a settlement complete with bakeries, breweries, granaries, and even a facility that appears to have served as a kind of ancient hospital where healed bones were found among the buried. The laborers were not enslaved foreigners, but Egyptians, drawn from farming communities across the Nile Valley, organized into rotating crews that served for months at a time, likely during the annual flood season when agricultural work was impossible. Graffiti discovered inside the relieving chambers above the king's chamber includes team names, phrases like Friends of Khufu, suggesting a sense of pride and collective identity among the builders. Analysis of animal bones found at the village site indicates that these workers were fed beef, a luxury food in ancient Egypt, implying that the state invested considerable resources in their care and sustenance. The diet also included bread, fish, and beer, the staples of Egyptian life, provided in quantities sufficient to fuel extraordinarily demanding physical labor. Some estimates suggest the workforce numbered around 20,000 to 30,000 individuals at any given time, a figure far smaller than the 100,000 once proposed by the Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote his account roughly 2,000 years after the pyramid's completion. The organizational sophistication required to house, feed, schedule, and coordinate tens of thousands of workers across a project spanning approximately 2 decades represents one of the earliest known examples of large-scale labor management in human history. It was not the whip that built the Great Pyramid, but something closer to national purpose. A civilization marshalling its collective strength in service of a vision so vast it would outlast every empire that followed. And then there is the question of what lies inside. Not merely the chambers that have been explored for centuries, but the spaces that may still remain hidden. The interior of the Great Pyramid contains three principal chambers. The Subterranean Chamber, carved roughly 30 meters below the original ground level into the bedrock of the Giza Plateau. The so-called Queen's Chamber, situated near the heart of the structure. And the King's Chamber, located higher still, containing a single granite sarcophagus carved from a block so large it must have been placed during construction before the walls were sealed around it. Above the King's Chamber, 5 small relieving chambers were stacked to distribute the immense weight of the stone above and prevent the ceiling from collapsing inward. These spaces, first fully explored in the 1830s by Howard Vyse, revealed the construction gang graffiti mentioned earlier, the only place inside the pyramid where the name of Khufu appears. But in 2017, an international team of physicists working under the Scan Pyramids project used muon tomography, a technique that detects cosmic ray particles passing through stone at different rates depending on density, to identify a previously unknown void above the Grand Gallery. This void, roughly 30 meters in length, represents the first major structural discovery inside the Great Pyramid since the 19th century. Its purpose remains entirely unknown. It may be a construction gap, a deliberate architectural feature designed to reduce weight above the Grand Gallery, or it may be something else altogether, a sealed chamber whose contents, if any, have rested undisturbed for more than 4,500 years. The researchers have been careful to avoid speculation, noting only that the void is real and that its function is not yet understood. And so the pyramid keeps its silence, as it always has, holding within its limestone body spaces that no living eye has seen, rooms perhaps where darkness has remained unbroken since the reign of a king whose name the modern world barely remembers, yet whose monument refuses, gently and absolutely, to be forgotten. So we leave the Great Pyramid now, not by walking away from it, but by letting it recede gently into the deep, warm dark of an Egyptian night. It stands where it has always stood, on its plateau of ancient bedrock under the slow wheel of the stars. 45 centuries of sunrises have warmed its eastern face. 45 centuries of desert nights have cooled its stone. And it remains. It does not ask to be understood. It does not demand to be admired. It simply endures, the way the earth endures, the way the stars endure, patient and still and full of time. You have learned something tonight. Let it settle into you now the way sand settles into the spaces between stones, gently, naturally, finding its place without effort. Your breathing is slow. Your body is heavy and warm. And the last image in your mind is a single great shape against the sky, luminous in moonlight, older than memory, standing watch over a sleeping world. Rest now. You have earned this peace. If this journey through the ages has brought you a measure of peace tonight, consider subscribing so that tomorrow night another story will be waiting for you. Thank you for spending your night with Let's Learn while you sleep. Subscribe and come back tomorrow night. We'll be here. Sleep well.